Okay, this is part six of this series, this new series I'm doing about how the evolution of perception concept came about and its value and significance. And here, uh, I feel like I can take a break from explaining the idea because I've done that so many times, and there's lots of videos online, and there's a lot of reading material on it that I've provided. And here I want to talk about its value and significance. So anyway, before I start that, I want to go over what there is in material that you can download or buy. This is the first book that I wrote. It's a photograph of me when I was about 43 when I first had the idea, and it was taken by my girlfriend Allison, who was sweet enough to give me permission to use the photo for the cover. And I designed it, and there's a reason that there's my face is there. Um, it's a kind of complicated reason, but I won't go into it. But anyway, this is out of print. This is a 2004 book, the original book on the evolution of perception, and it's been out of print because it was self-published. That means I took it out of print because I was discouraged that no one seemed too interested in it, and it was silly. It was impulsive to take it off, but once I took it off, I couldn't put it back on. So it's now out of print, and but I have a free download for this on Substack and on my web hub, and it's also other places online where you can download it for free, the PDF. So it's only 81 pages, has some illustrations. I felt very good about it at the time, and I still feel really good about it. In a way, this is my most important book. Is I had a master's in philosophy, and I was developing this idea while I was working on my thesis with my thesis advisor, Richard Lee, who was from Stanford. And we decided not to describe this idea in my thesis because I said I wanted to do it later on my own, because I wanted to have full control of it. I didn't want advice. This is my own idea. So I published it about 3 years after I graduated, but took a lot of thinking. And I later did another book called The Evolution of Perception Re-Explained, where I spent another 2.5 years reading just to prepare for it. And I corrected some of the things I felt were wrong or not clear, and made them more clear. But you can, there's that book, and there's Evolution of Perception Re-Explained, and there's another one called Further Reflections. It's very short. But anyway, there's 3 books, but all 3 books I published in this book called EOP Trilogy. So I now call the Evolution of Perception just EOP in writing because it's simpler and it's catchy. It's kind of branding. It has a kind of brand quality to it. So this is available online, hardback or paperback, on Amazon. And then since then, I've been writing a lot of essays over the years on the same idea, and I have selected essays, and I have selected essays second series, and these are available on Amazon also. So that pretty much. So because the first book's out of print, but it's contained in this one, you have all my writing in just 3 books. And the only part I give away is the first book. You can download it. It's 81 pages. And it has the essential idea. And so now, in the first 5 parts of this series, I went over the evolution of perception, how it came to mind, and what its inspirations were. It was I'll review some of that stuff after this, I think, because it's interesting to me, and I always enjoy finding new ways to come at it. You can approach this idea from a lot of different um, starting points. So um, that's why I have so many videos online about it. And as I said in the first video, I knew when I wrote the first book that it was the only idea. That was the idea that I was going to have in this life. It wasn't like I have a lot of others, though I have a lot of other interests. I don't do record videos or write papers about them because there are other people who are have greater expertise in those areas, and it would be redundant for me to write about them. But I especially like following geopolitics and um, a lot of arts. I still enjoy films and more recently computer games, video games. And I like watching reactions to games. And let's see, I'm very interested in photography equipment because I use it to do these. Even though, well, I could talk technically, like there's some problems with my camera, and occasionally you may see it get light and then dark and light, and I don't know why that is. I have a very good camera, but I'm not going to buy another one because it's too much money. And this one's fine, and I don't think anyone really probably notices that. The other thing is sometimes my material goes out of focus, and that's because it's video, so I leave it on continuous focus, autofocus, and that means that occasionally it will focus on the wrong thing, and I have no one here to help me with that, so that happens. So if it gets light or dark or out of focus, I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can. Probably the funny thing about that is if I used a little, video camera and put it on the top of my my screen the way some people do, the way reactors do, or a lot of um, influencers do. They just put a little camera on the top, and that it has a broad focus, and it doesn't get light or dark, and it's much more portable. But I went to film school, so I like playing with filters and things. And by the way, you may notice that this image looks a little different in color than the other ones because I fiddle with the gels. And that's interesting because my whole idea is about using the analogy of lenses and gels, because my background was originally in first animation, then I was a camera assistant at an animation studio, and I was a photographer's assistant, and I did wedding videos, and I also made movies at one time, long time ago. But I didn't have a lot of talent there. But I don't have anything left from that time. So anyway, I wanted to say the value now of the evolution of perception. I took some notes here, and I might need to spend a couple videos on this because there's so many different things I probably will forget some. Explaining its value and its purpose. Okay. First, I want to say why this may not interest many people, but it's still important. And you'd be like, how could that be? If it was important, wouldn't everybody be interested? No, that's not actually how life works. And let me explain a principle that I've thought about, and that is that the shorter term the interest, the greater the interest. Okay, so give me an example. You take most people are mostly interested in their short-term desires and their immediate concerns regarding their immediate survival, like food and clothing and losing weight and health, and those are immediate survival needs. And if you look at videos about those kinds of things, there's a lot of views, or things that change that are recently new developments. People are really interested in following that, like fashions or a new band or a new technology, a new iPhone that's come out, a new kind of camera. You'll get a lot of views if you talk about those things that are recent, or everything's like that. Like we greet each other, we talk about the weather. Everyone's interested in the weather because it's always changing. It's very recent. They talk about what's in the news. Um, every day it's something new in the news, and what's newest in the news is what people mostly talk about. Then there are other things that are very long term. People are less interested in them usually, but there's some interest. So, like history and geology and the sciences, and they go very slowly. So let's take geopolitics, because that's one of my interests. You have a development that happens in the world, like the end of feudalism, that had enormous impact on the great number of people for the longest time. Um, but those kinds of changes take hundreds of years, and they happened hundreds of years ago, or thousands. But we would consider those highly significant changes, much more significant than like who won the football game this morning, is like the end of feudalism, let's say, um, or the collapse of the Soviet Union and things like that. And currently, those changes have to do with a move from the unipolar world to what they call the multipolar world. And that's a shift that's happening over a few decades. And that may affect the world for 100 years or several hundred years. We don't know. But less people know about that than they know about recent things in the news. So the final category is things that are eternal. They are always true if they're true. So that would be like, how did the universe form? Okay. Well, no, that's an incident. Let's say the laws by which it formed. Okay, laws of nature like gravity, they are not temporary things that happened recently and are going to affect the world for a while. They are always with us and will always affect the world. And physics is interested in these permanent things, and um, theoretical mathematics. These are very abstract, and the least number of people are interested in these. And those are the kinds of things that I talk about, those permanent things. So if the world evolved because of an evolution of perception, as I've described, that was always true, is true, and will always be true. But it is less interesting for some reason. I'm not exactly sure. I think there are periods in history where people did get interested in those permanent things. And they often are, yeah. So when in the early Middle Ages, people were debating over issues like the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Um, that was a kind of a big topic about the 3rd century. That's one of those permanent things. Like if there's a Trinity, there's always a Trinity. It's not like a new thing. But so there was a time that people did get interested in that. And in Germany, I believe in the very early 1800s, there was a tremendous interest in German idealism. And people would go to big talks by George Hegel, and he would talk about principles in philosophy. And so there have been times when philosophy was an interest, and this isn't one of them. Right now, people are interested in the most temporary things, and there are reasons. things are changing quickly, and people want to keep up. Sometimes it's even important for your job, or even how to get medical help and stuff, to know how to surf the web and see how things work. And that's always changing how you do things. And, we're going from cash to car CBDCs and all kinds of things. You got to know how all that works. So now, so that's kind of an analogy and an explanation how this could be important, but not very exciting to many people. So people aren't excited about a thing because it's important and significant or permanent or earth-shaking. They are because it's fashionable or it's trending. I wish I could remember her name. There was a girl who did a jean commercial a few months ago, and she was really in the news. I mean, because I forget why. She advertised some jeans, and that was a big thing. But that's what I mean. Like, that's the kind of thing everybody knows about. People don't know about the evolution of perception, but that's not a sign it's not a significant thing. Like jeans are kind of not a significant thing. Okay? I think I made that point. So now let's get into why I say this is important or significant. First of all, I kind of went over one of them in part 5, was that prior to this concept, there was no explanation for how the laws of nature come about, or even what they are, because you realize they are mathematical equations, but they govern the world. So how could some math, in what state does this math exist? Like, is it somewhere in the universe, the math? And what is math? Like, math is mental. So how could it be somewhere ontologically? Ontological means in its being or existence. What kind of being or existence do the laws have? And then how do they evolve? Most people don't even consider that. For instance, you have an idea today called the Big Bang. And the Big Bang, I'll show a little animation down here for the Big Bang, but the Big Bang is where there was once everything was condensed into this one spot, and then it blew apart and became the universe. And originally, before it exploded, everything was kind of like all down, smushed into this little walnut, real small. And in there was space, time, and the laws of nature. And then by the laws of nature, of course, this exploded. Okay, so what is space and where did it come from? What is time and where did it come from? What are the laws, which are mathematical, and where did they come from? That's fine that they came out of a little walnut, but what was in that? How are they in a walnut? How do you get what math scrunched together? How do you squinch time together into a walnut? So these are very, well, frankly, they're very stupid ideas, very dumb, because the exploding, if it happened according to the laws of nature. So they had to already pre-exist. So the Big Bang does not actually explain the world. It explains the world in terms of things that we find in the world, like natural laws. And it explains the world in terms of space, because it was a point in space at one time. But it doesn't explain space. And then it happened at a certain point in time. Like they say like 13 billion years ago. Well, there's that point in time on a timeline. But what's time? So nothing is really explained. The Big Bang is kind of a fantasy in terms of things that exist and that we can't explain. But evolution of perception gives an explanation of time, space, and the natural laws, and how they evolved, and what they are. And if you read Evolution of Perception Re-Explained, they even go into speculations on why this happened. So we really have a lot more that's explained by the evolution of perception than was previously by religion or science. Well, I didn't say anything about religion, but in the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." Well, what does that tell us? He said that. How did he do that? Well, it doesn't say. And where did he come from? Well, it doesn't say. So basically, that doesn't tell us anything. It's kind of like the Big Bang. Um, it's all just magical thinking. It doesn't actually provide a process by which these things arose and what they are. In the evolution of perception, they're lenses, and that's what they are. The time is a lens, the space is a lens, and the laws of nature are lenses. Meaning, it's a metaphor. They're perceptual schemas that evolve, and the world, which is a perceptual, experiential thing. What do we mean by the world? We mean our experience, right? If I go to the mountains, and I see a beautiful view, and I look out, and I'm amazed, at the view. Well, isn't that the world? Isn't that experience the world? Yeah. So I actually propose that the world is experience, and that it's one that we share, and that because we arose out of the same process, and it's a world that formed out of a process of evolving perception or evolving experience. And I've done so many papers about this, but as I said, I don't have anything else to do except repeat myself, because it keeps me happy, and it's something to do. It's fun, and it's forever interesting to me. And it even interests me that people have not generally taken much interest in this. I feel confident that they once will, and that's why I'm going over these things. Okay, so there was when I was studying philosophy, one of the subjects that I really enjoyed was called philosophy of science, and there were several philosophers of science that interested me and deeply, and I wrote a paper about one of them, and for my degree. And they're Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, and the other is Norwood Hanson, and both of them are very related to Kant, by the way. They're both influenced by Kant, but Thomas Kuhn is the one who gave us the idea of a paradigm shift, or a paradigm. And then, a paradigm is kind of like a set of rules that a group of people share that work together. So when we look at, when you study physics and you go work in a lab, everybody is working under within a certain paradigm about how things operate. And it's necessary that they do that. Otherwise, they'd all not even be able to talk to each other. They'd all have their own ideas. We need to share ideas. We have a shared view. I talk about that right away in my first book, and I say it's kind of like a lens, a shared lens that we all peer through, and that's our paradigm that we're in. And we have been, for the last about 125 years, we've been in a materialist paradigm. There was kind of a revolt against past philosophy in about 1903, and G.E. Moore and Bertrand Russell, both at Cambridge, basically rebelled against something called idealism that had been prevailing for about 150 years before them. And they ushered in this sort of reductive materialism, or radical scientific materialism. And that's the idea, where you get that idea of the Big Bang. All the matter is jammed in here. And Kant would have called this pre-critical thinking. And you can look that up. That's an actual term he used. He kind of meant by pre-critical thinking that you would have before you read his book, The Critique of Pure Reason. So they're pre-critical because they're the critique, which did, for about 200 years, change the whole world, um, how we think. For instance, existentialism would never have existed if there weren't Kant's critique of pure reason. There never would have been German idealism or British idealism. But in 1903, we came into the current paradigm that we're in. I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a sidetrack because my point was to introduce who Kuhn was and what he said about science. He said that science actually operates not going from dumber to smarter and smarter and smarter. He proposed that actually there were different paradigms and you have paradigm shifts. And so something that people once thought actually made sense given their context. Okay, and within the paradigm, it was all consistent. And he gives many examples, but one of them is the shift from the Earth-centered solar system to the Copernican solar system, where it's all planets move around the sun. And he said, actually, see, the original idea was proposed by Aristotle 2,500 years ago, but Thomas Kuhn pointed out that, actually, Aristotle's idea that all the planets are moving around the Earth could work. You'd have to do a lot of fixing to get it to work, but it does work as a system. So he believed that it's just a shift in paradigm to our current view. Now, I disagree with him. I think there are reasons to believe that the planets go around the sun, and I believe it has to do with the process. If you go back to the process of the formation of the solar system from the nebulas, then you see, well, that's probably how it really is. So you can't actually test that. It's just two paradigms of the way you look at it. You can't go out into space and see if the Earth is moving around the sun or the sun is moving around the Earth, because it would depend on your what's called an inertial reference frame. So if you're flying with the Earth, it'll look like the sun is moving. But if you're flying with the sun, it'll look like the Earth is moving. So it's not a thing you can observe. It's conceptual. Now, the evolution of perception is itself a new paradigm. It's a shift in how we look upon things. It's not like I discovered something with a shovel on the ground. It's like I looked at the data that we had and the information, like I talked about space and time and the laws and so forth, and I gave it a new interpretation. And that's where everything went inside out and upside down. And it's really interesting because it has a lot of potential value. And that's why I'm going over paradigm shifts and why I'm getting into Kuhn, because Kuhn actually defined the kind of qualities that a new paradigm in science needs to have to be to survive. Because he was a historian of science, and so he could see that there were certain when some new ideas came and they just faded away, they were abandoned, but others stuck. And so he looked at, well, what were the qualities of the ones that stuck? And so he made a list, and these are, he called the pragmatic virtues of scientific revolutions. And he said that, I'm going to go over these because they all apply well to the concept of an evolution of perception, okay? And okay, the theory's predictions should agree with experiments and observations. They do. Like when I talked in part 5, I said this pen follows the laws of nature. And I could write out the laws of nature. Sorry, I could write them out. And this would conform this theory that this is created out of the laws of nature and therefore has to obey the laws of nature. Well, that does conform with experiments and observation. Okay, so that's one, accuracy. 2, was consistency. It should not contradict itself. It shouldn't say one thing here and then the next moment you say something that totally contradicts that, but that's part of the system too. It's all got to be consistent with itself. And definitely the evolution of perception is consistent and complete explanation of the universe. There's That's why I'm able to talk about it for 25 years. I've really actually spent like the first 10 years of those 25 years just wondering, is there some contradiction here? But that's not unusual for philosophers to do that. Kant himself did that when he wrote the Critique. The Critique of Pure Reason. He took him a while to think about it, and then he went, "No, it totally it works. It's consistent." Well, this too is a little more worked out than Kant's idea. It takes Kant's idea further, but as I said in the last video. But this, or maybe it was in part 4, I don't remember, where I talked about how Kant just had two lenses, space and time. And then I realized that the laws of nature are ratios of time and space, so you can add them. And then you could form, you know, the rest of everything out of those laws. Okay. All right, the next one is scope. I just downloaded these from Wikipedia or someplace, or Google, but I remember reading them. Kuhn wrote a book most famously called, let's see, it was called it was called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He wrote that in 1962, and that's where he talked about these paradigms. But these pragmatic virtues that I'm describing now are from another book called Objective Value, Judgment, and Theory Choice. And that was actually an essay, and it was published in 1977. So about 15 years after the first book about paradigms. But anyway, so accuracy, consistency, scope, and the next one is simplicity. And that is really important because the evolution of perception, originally it was subtitle was A Simpler Theory of Everything. And I took a class on epistemology from a very good philosopher, pretty famous one, named Chris Hale. And he described that when you say that a theory is simpler, remember Occam's razor is that all things being equal, when you have to make a choice between two theories, you choose the simpler one, the one with the least unverifiable assumptions. Okay, that's simpler. But Chris Hale pointed out that an idea could be simple. There are many senses of the word simple, and we could have a simple idea, but it would be quite stupid, because it might be simplistic. Like, for instance, the world is created by a tortoise, a turtle. And there you go, that explains it. Well, everything came out of the turtle, so that's simple. That's much more simple than all this complicated science you study in physics. So, but that's simplistic, but that's not what we mean, what Kuhn means by simplicity. And he talked about what we mean is metaphysical simplicity. So these are metaphysical entities that we have to posit to create the system. And the evolution of perception does not posit any metaphysical hidden entities at all, because this represents perception, and that's not a theory. That's not even an entity. It's a verb. Okay? And these are adverbs. Okay? So if this is an action that we all do, it's not something I came up with a theory that there's something called experience. It's something that we all suffer or enjoy every second. So that's like the one self-evident reality or fact. So it's not a metaphysical entity that has been proposed in a theory. Past theories are chock full of metaphysical entities. Okay? This isn't. Okay? Now these are ways of perceiving. So these are adverbial. adverbial. So they're not entities either. They're not anything more and above this one reality. Okay? So you really only have a single reality, which is evolving experience, and you have no entities at all. All the apparent entities that we see, like here, let's draw a cup. That's an entity. An entity just means a thing. But this is not. First of all, it's not a metaphysical entity. It's not a theory that I came up with that there's cups. I mean, I see cups, but the cups are formed out of this process. Okay, so I didn't propose cups to make the system work. The system explains cups. We don't need cups to explain the system. Okay, so the current system, we have to list the entities all like a long line. I could go into it, and I do on the back of my book, but it would take a bunch. I'll put those entities maybe in the show notes. I'm not sure if I'll get around to that. But the ones that we now use in science, this idea has no metaphysical entities, theoretical metaphysical entities at all. Okay, and it is a form of non-dualism, as I explained in part 2 of this series. And in non-dualism, you don't have multiple things; you just have one. So it's definitely the simplest that has ever been proposed to explain things scientifically, ever. I absolutely stand by that. By the way, Advaita Vedanta and I can't pronounce it, Wahud ul Wujud, which is the Arab form of non-dualism proposed by Ibn Arabi in the 12th century. These theories don't explain how the world came about. They are theories of how things are, and that things are. Ibn Arabi described the one reality is the absolute, and Shankara, who created Advaita Vedanta, said the one reality is Brahman, and we are actually all Brahman. And Ibn Arabi would say we are all actually not separate from the absolute from the beginning. But they don't know how the world forms. So when I say this is the most simple idea of formation ever proposed, I actually know that. That's actually true. Now, this was all taken from Kant and Meher Baba and stuff and put together. So it's not like I came up with every bit of it. And I would say that this process is implied in Meher Baba's books. Okay, it's not implied in Kant's, but suggested already in Kant. But so you could say it's been around since Meher Baba wrote about this and published about it for the first time in the 50s in his book, God Speaks. God Speaks, and you can actually download this for free online. I've given away this book so many times. I'm not really okay. So the Avatar Meher Baba Trust gives away all Meher Baba's books for free as PDF, but it's not that easy to find their website. So I have a page where I give PDFs of all his major works. But in here, in God Speaks, you do have this process that's already implied. But he doesn't lay it out the way I have, because it's not his focus. His focus is on the spiritual aspirant and the soul and achieving unity, like what they call mystical union in Christian mysticism, or they call moksha in Buddhism and Hinduism. I'm not sure they have that in Buddhism. I can't remember. I'd have to ask my friend Stelios to tell me. They have nirvana in Buddhism. Anyway, okay, so here we go. The simplicity. I spent a lot of time on that. And now the fifth thing, and this is the last one, is fruitfulness. And this is really, really interesting. Fruitfulness is described by Kuhn as this new, revolution in science. Scientific revolution should disclose new phenomena and create room for further research by other scholars. And the phenomena that I disclose is psychological phenomena, like the framing, the sanskaras, or what I call the perceptual schemas. You can actually find them in your experience, but you simply re-describe what they are. Whereas before you thought it was an aspect of what you're looking at, it could be that too, but it's most fundamentally actually a schema of your own perception. So, or the schema of perception that came even before humans arose. So everybody has them. And so the way to describe fruitfulness is what he meant is this: there's room for research by other scholars. Okay, so for Kuhn, it would not be a paradigm shift in science, a revolutionary change in science that would stick if it just had nothing for anyone to do. Like, oh, I see. And everybody just goes, oh, well, okay, maybe. Okay, I don't know what to say. It really actually sounds kind of contradictory, but there still has to be more left for people to do to figure out to make it all work. And he called the first thing, where you have the new idea, he called that revolutionary science. That's why his first book is called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. That's what he's talking about, these revolutions in science, paradigm shifts. But after very little science is revolutionary. Most science is what he calls ordinary science. And that's where the one person comes along, I would say I was Theravada, and then I just sort of followed him, or you'd say Kant back here. But then you have this big bam, the evolution of perception. Look, that's with EOP. But now you have all these people for hundreds of years that try to work it out, the details. They don't deny the system, but they say, well, what do I do with my, I got to get a degree, I have to write a dissertation, I have to spend a life publishing papers. So what can I do? Well, you go ahead fleshing out that new paradigm and making it more detailed. And I've always felt not only that my idea would be accepted one day, but that if I were to come back and reincarnate in 100 years and try to be a philosopher, it would be pretty awful, because I probably wouldn't even be able to understand what they were talking about. They had moved on, and they would still be within that basic paradigm, but they would have developed it to a much more sophisticated level. And I'm not that sophisticated a thinker, and I'm not that good for details, and I sort of see I'm kind of a generalist, so I wouldn't be able to really do that. What I'm good at is seeing this initial general gist. Okay, now I have a friend named Stelios Karavias, and he is Greek, and he lives in Uruguay with his wife, and he and I have been online friends for 20 years, and we have, as soon as we met working on a Wikipedia article about Meher Baba. Actually, we worked on many other articles. We've both done a lot of Wikipedia work, but don't so much anymore, but we did 20 years ago. And I sent him The Evolution of Perception. At the time, he was living in Europe. And I sent that to him, and he read it, and he showed it to his mother. She couldn't understand it. My mother couldn't understand it either. That's just a tidbit. I didn't need to mention that. But it's like if a person got a few people got this book, but then they'd show it to somebody else, and they go, I don't know, what the hell is that? It's pretty intense. Since it's free, you might as well download it, huh? You can maybe you'll wake up in the middle of the night and start reading it. So Stelios and I kind of recently, we were trying to work out more detailed aspects of these lenses, okay? And there's some other writing even in Meher Baba that we're trying to syncretize this with. And so, like Meher Baba doesn't talk about perceptual schema. He does use the analogy of lenses, but this uses basically only that analogy. Meher Baba has a whole bunch of analogies. I've written actually a paper just on, I forget, there's like 30 analogies in one of his books. Well, one of them is the lenses. And so we were trying to schematize this, and I can't even remember the details. So we have a lot of writing and emails back and forth on this we save, but that's the kind of thing, there's a lot of work left to do for the future, that people can write their dissertation on some aspect. I wrote my master's thesis on George Berkeley, and Berkeley he wrote his first book in 1710, and The Principles. And I did my thesis partly on him and partly on another philosopher and comparing them. And Berkeley, my professor, who, as I said, had his PhD from Stanford, I really respected him a lot, and he was so smart, Richard Lee. I probably is retired now. But he had written a paper about Berkeley, and it was called What Berkeley's Notions Are. So Berkeley uses the word ideas a lot in his books. And in one part, he refers to notions. We have ideas of things like this, and the colors and this and the texture and stuff, those he called ideas. But when he talked about minds, he didn't want to say we have an idea of a mind, because that would mean like sensible quality. So he used the word notions to make a difference. We have a notion of what a mind is, because he didn't, because we have one. But so Dr. Lee had written a paper in a journal on idealism, which he said what Berkeley's notions are, and I read it and I mentioned it in my thesis. But the point is that here Berkeley lived in 1710, and yet here's my professor at Stanford writing publishing a paper about one word that Berkeley used. So that's the kind of idea where you have something that sticks, okay? It wouldn't stick if there was nothing to talk about. So the fact, if you see some things where you still have questions, like, well, how does that work, okay? How could this I have awoken and formed time before there was time? That would be a thing to write a paper about, wouldn't it? So there was a time when this was like a closed eye, okay? Using an analogy. But then something caused it to open, and that created time, the time length. And now with something Stellianus and I don't really have a problem with, and we've talked about it, but it's the kind of thing that would make a great dissertation. And I've tried to write about it myself. So how do you have the formation of time? Because this is sort of like the time before time, It's kind of like a sci-fi title. So that's called, according to Kuhn, fruitfulness. And that is not a problem with the theory, that is actually one of the key virtues. And so I'm going to talk more, that I've gone on long enough in this video, but I'm going to break it in half, and I'm going to do another part in part 7, and I'm going to go on about the many values that we can find in the evolution of perception, ways that it could actually benefit humanity. It's not just cosmic idea. It's something that would actually have implications in your daily life, and I want to talk about that in part 7. But this is all I'm going to do today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the other side in part 7. Take care.